I'm sitting in my new apartment, divorce papers finally signed, reflecting on how quickly 5 years of marriage crumbled. 3 months ago, I was a married man with a mortgage and a wife who used to steal my hoodies on Sunday mornings. Now, I'm holding keys to a one-bedroom downtown, wondering how the right poison got introduced to our well. The before times weren't perfect, but they were ours. Claire and I had our rhythm. Coffee at 6:30, her reading emails while I scrambled eggs, fighting for the bathroom mirror before work. Saturday mornings meant farmers' market runs and arguing about whether we needed another succulent. Sunday evenings were meal prep and documentaries that Claire would fall asleep during, her head finding that perfect spot on my shoulder. She used to say she loved our predictable life. It's like we're our own little ecosystem, she'd tell me, usually while updating the grocery list. Claire thrived on routine, on the quiet intimacy of knowing exactly how the other person took their coffee. She was the one who insisted we needed matching mugs, who bought us a Sunday Times subscription for crosswords together. Then Sarah moved in down the street. I remember Sarah's U-Haul pulling up to the blue house 3 doors down. Claire had been watching from our kitchen window, coffee growing cold. "That's Sarah's truck," she'd said. But I only see Sarah. Sarah had been Claire's college roommate, maid of honor at our wedding, and the kind of person who made every gathering feel like a performance. She'd married Tom right after graduation, a quiet IT guy who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by his wife's energy. When Sarah's marriage imploded, Claire immediately went into rescue mode, bringing casseroles and spending evenings at Sarah's place. Initially, I felt sympathy for Sarah. I even offered to help move furniture. But within weeks, I started noticing changes in Claire that set off quiet alarm bells. It started small. Claire began questioning our weekend routines. "Don't you think we're getting too comfortable?" she'd ask after returning from Sarah's. "Sarah says couples our age should be more spontaneous." Our grocery conversations became criticisms of our boring choices. Our Sunday tradition became just sitting there, consuming media like zombies. The phrases were what got to me first. Claire started using words that didn't sound like her, talking about living authentically and exploring personal growth. She'd come home from girls' nights speaking in carefully constructed sentences about evolving beyond conventional relationship models. I watched my wife transform through someone else's lens, becoming someone I didn't recognize. The Claire I married was thoughtful, made decisions based on how they affected both of us. This new Claire spoke in borrowed language about individual fulfillment and not settling for less than you deserve. At first, I tried to be supportive. When Claire suggested new restaurants, I agreed. When she wanted to redecorate for more dynamic energy, I helped. When she started pottery classes for creative exploration, I encouraged her. I thought this was just a phase, processing Sarah's divorce, questioning her choices the way people do. But the changes kept coming. Claire critiqued everything about our life. Our morning routine became mindless going through motions. Our shared Netflix became evidence we were too merged. Even our inside jokes became targets. "We're like an old married couple," she'd say, not fondly. The breaking point came on a Thursday in March. Claire had been out with Sarah for dinner, but didn't come home until after midnight. When she slipped into our bedroom, I could smell wine and Sarah's sharp floral perfume. "How was dinner?" I asked. Claire sat on the bed's edge, back to me. "We had a really good conversation about marriage," she said carefully. "About how it's supposed to evolve, not stay the same forever." I set down my book. In the lamplight, Claire looked like herself but different, like someone practicing to be someone else. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we've been too focused on security and not enough on growth. Sarah was telling me about this book, about how the strongest marriages are ones where both people continue discovering themselves individually." The words came out rehearsed, like she'd been having this conversation with Sarah for weeks. They sounded foreign from Claire's mouth, like reading someone else's script. "Claire, that sounds like something Sarah would say. What do you think?" She was quiet, processing, trying to find her voice underneath borrowed ideas. "I think maybe we've gotten too comfortable, too predictable. Maybe we should be more open to exploring." That word, exploring, landed like a stone through glass. I felt something fundamental shift, though I didn't understand what was coming. I just knew my wife was speaking in code, using language that meant something specific to her and Sarah, and I was no longer part of that conversation. The poison seed had been planted, and I could feel it taking root. The conversation that ended my marriage happened on a Wednesday evening in April, exactly 3 weeks after the exploring comment. Claire had been building up to it for days. I could feel it in how she moved through our house, the careful attention to timing, starting sentences, then stopping herself. She waited until after dinner, dishes done, settling into evening routine. I was on the couch with my laptop when Claire appeared holding 2 glasses of wine. She never brought wine during weeknight email sessions. "Can we talk?" she asked, setting glasses on the coffee table with careful precision. She sat on the opposite end, angling to face me, and I closed my laptop, because whatever was coming would require full attention. Claire looked beautiful in the soft living room light, wearing the blue sweater I'd bought for Christmas. She'd done her hair and makeup, which she rarely did for home evenings. Later, I'd realize she'd dressed for this like a job interview, presenting her best self for something requiring persuasion. "I've been thinking," she began, voice steady and calm in a way more terrifying than anger, "about us, about our marriage, about what we both need to be happy." I didn't respond immediately, watching her face, looking for the Claire I'd married underneath this carefully composed version. Her hands were folded, perfectly still, speaking in that measured tone she used for difficult work conversations. "I love you," she continued, the words hitting like a physical blow because of how they sounded, like opening arguments in a case she was making. "I love you so much, and I love what we've built. But I think we might be limiting ourselves by being so exclusive in our approach to marriage." The word exclusive hung between us like smoke. I felt my chest tighten, breathing become shallow. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading since Sarah moved down the street. "I've been reading about different relationship models," Claire said, reaching for her wine. "And I think we might be happier, more fulfilled, if we were more open to experiencing other connections. Other people." She said it so calmly, so reasonably, as if suggesting a new restaurant. But I heard it for what it was, a carefully worded request for permission to cheat with my blessing. I didn't respond immediately. I was experiencing something strange, not the explosion of rage I might have expected, but cold, crystal clear understanding. In that moment, I realized our marriage was already over. Not because of what she was asking, but because she was asking it at all. "This isn't about not loving you," Claire continued, interpreting my silence as consideration rather than horror. "This is about growth, about not limiting ourselves to one person for all our needs. Sarah's been exploring this, and she says it's actually made her understand herself better." There it was, Sarah's name, finally spoken, the architect of this moment, the poison dripping into my wife's ear for months. "So you want an open marriage?" I said quietly. Claire nodded, relief in her face that I'd understood. "I think it could be really healthy for us. A way to explore parts of ourselves we might not have discovered otherwise. It doesn't have to change what we have. It could actually strengthen it." I looked at this woman I'd loved for 7 years, lived with for 5, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The Claire I'd married would never have had this conversation. She understood that asking your spouse for permission to sleep with others was, itself, betrayal. "Have you already found someone?" I asked. Claire's careful composure flickered. "It's not like that. This isn't about a specific person. It's about the principle, about being honest about our needs instead of pretending we don't have them." But I could see the lie in her eyes. This was about someone specific. She'd already been having conversations, making connections, building justifications. She was asking for retroactive permission for something already begun. "I see," I said, setting down my wine. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. "So you want to stay married to me, live in this house, share our life, but also have freedom to explore other relationships?" "Yes," Claire said hopefully. "Exactly. We could have the security and love of what we've built, but also the excitement and growth from connecting with other people. I nodded slowly, processing not just what she was saying, but what she wasn't. She expected me to negotiate. She expected this to be a discussion where I might express concerns or set boundaries. She expected me to treat this as reasonable from someone who loved me. But sitting there, I experienced something I'd never felt before. Complete emotional detachment from someone I'd loved deeply. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly I could see our entire relationship with perfect clarity. Claire had been cultivating desires and fantasies that excluded me. She'd been building a case for why our marriage wasn't enough, why I wasn't enough. She'd been planning this conversation for weeks, never once considering my response might be anything other than reluctant agreement. "If that's what you want," I said calmly, "you can have it." Alone. Claire's face went white. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you want to explore other relationships, you're free to do that. But you'll be doing it as a single woman, not as my wife." "David, that's not—" Claire scrambled to her feet, reaching for me. "I'm not asking for divorce. I'm asking for us to evolve together." I stepped back from her reaching hands. "Claire, the moment you decided you wanted to sleep with other people, you ended our marriage. You just wanted me to give permission first." "You're overreacting," she said, panic in her voice. "This is about growth, about not limiting ourselves. Lots of couples do this. Sarah says—" "I don't care what Sarah says," I interrupted. "Sarah's marriage ended. Is that what you want?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I want us to be happy. I want us to have everything we need." "What I need," I said quietly, "is a wife who doesn't want to f*** other people. Since that's not you anymore, we're done." The words came out calmly, without anger, and I could see my lack of emotion was more devastating than rage would have been. She'd prepared for me to be upset, to need convincing, to require emotional labor. She hadn't prepared for me to simply opt out entirely. "David, please," she said, tears streaming. "Can we just talk about this? Can we just slow down and think?" But I was already moving toward the stairs, toward our bedroom, toward the overnight bag I would pack before sleeping in the guest room. "There's nothing to think about. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I left Claire standing in our living room, still holding her wine glass. I could hear her crying as I packed, hear her making phone calls, probably to Sarah, probably looking for support in her decision to blow up our marriage. But I felt nothing except strange relief. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I was doing and why. Claire had shown me who she'd become, and I was choosing not to be married to that person. It was the clearest decision I'd ever made. The power of silence is something most people never understand. They think power comes from shouting, dramatic gestures, forced confrontations. But real power, the kind that changes everything, comes from simply withdrawing your participation in someone else's disrespect. I didn't slam doors or throw things or demand explanations. I didn't give Claire the explosive reaction she might have expected. Instead, I became methodical, strategic. I began carefully removing myself from our shared life with the same precision I'd once used to build it. The morning after our conversation, I woke up in the guest room and started a document on my laptop. I titled it Timeline and began recording everything about the past 3 months. Not for legal purposes, our divorce would be straightforward, but for psychological clarity. I needed to see the pattern, understand how we'd gotten here. March 15th, Claire mentions Sarah's book about evolving marriages. First use of living authentically. March 22nd, Claire criticizes our boring routine, suggests more spontaneity. March 30th, Claire comes home late from Sarah's, talks about exploring possibilities. April 18th, the ask. Writing it down, I could see the campaign Claire had been running, maybe not consciously, but systematically. She'd been preparing both of us for this moment, laying groundwork, testing reactions, building her case. The woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who thought our relationship was a project to optimize rather than a bond to honor. I took a personal day and spent it getting affairs in order. I opened a new checking account where Claire wasn't authorized. I transferred half our savings, exactly half, and closed joint credit cards. I found a lawyer specializing in uncontested divorces and made an appointment. By the time Claire came home from work, I had already begun legally separating our lives. She found me in the home office, organizing financial documents. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Preparing for the divorce," I said without looking up. "I'm dividing our assets 50-50. You can have the house if you want. You'll need to refinance to remove my name." Claire sat heavily in the chair across from my desk. "David, I don't want a divorce. I just thought we could talk about it." I finally looked at her. She looked exhausted, like she'd been crying. "Claire," I said quietly, "you asked me for permission to cheat. You've been planning this for weeks. You've been building a case against our marriage for months. There's nothing left to talk about." The conversation went in circles for an hour. Claire alternated between anger and pleading, between blaming Sarah and claiming this was her idea. I listened with the detachment of someone watching a performance, recognizing she was cycling through every manipulation tactic she could think of. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved through our house like a ghost. I slept in the guest room, ate breakfast before Claire woke up, came home after she'd started her evening routine. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was simply removing myself from situations where she might try to re-engage me. The silence was devastating to her in ways I hadn't anticipated. Claire was used to talking through problems, processing emotions verbally, negotiating and compromising. My complete withdrawal left her with no one to argue with, no way to make herself the victim of my unreasonableness. She tried everything. She left notes around the house expressing regret and confusion. She made elaborate dinners that I politely declined, eating granola bars in the guest room instead. She even cleaned my car and left flowers on the windshield. Gestures that would have meant something a month ago, but now felt like attempts to buy back something no longer for sale. The worst part for Claire was that I wasn't angry. She could have worked with anger, fought against it, framed my reaction as overreaction. But my calm, complete disengagement left her nowhere to go. I was polite when we had to interact, practical when we discussed logistics, and entirely emotionally unavailable for anything else. I even ran into Sarah at the grocery store during this period. She was in produce, looking uncomfortable when she saw me approaching. "David," she said, voice overly bright. "How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, Sarah," I replied, selecting bananas with careful attention. "How are you settling into the neighborhood?" We made small talk for exactly 3 minutes. I asked about her new job, mentioned her house had good natural light, complimented her landscaping choices. I was perfectly pleasant, perfectly normal, and I could see my composure was deeply unsettling. Sarah had expected me to be angry, to blame her for my marriage's dissolution. Instead, I treated her like any other neighbor. Polite, distant, completely uninterested in anything beyond surface pleasantries. "I hope you and Claire can work things out," she said finally, fishing for information. "Claire and I are getting divorced," I replied pleasantly. "But I'm sure she'll be fine. She's been talking about wanting to explore new possibilities." Sarah's face went white. I'd used her own language, the phrases she'd fed Claire, but stripped of romantic idealism. Hearing them reflected back, Sarah seemed to realize for the first time that her influence had destroyed an actual marriage. That 3-minute conversation was its own form of psychological warfare. By refusing to engage with Sarah's guilt or need for absolution, by treating her as inconsequential to my life, I'd made it clear that I saw her for exactly what she was, a person who destroyed stable relationships to validate her own choices. My final night in our house, I packed the last belongings while Claire slept. I moved through our bedroom like a professional burglar, taking only what was mine, leaving no trace of disturbance. I took my books, clothes, my grandfather's watch, and the small wooden box with cufflinks. I didn't take anything we'd bought together, not the coffee mugs, not photographs, not small decorative items that had made our house feel like home. I left all of that for Claire, along with a brief note on the kitchen counter. "Claire, I'll be at the Marriott downtown until my apartment is ready. My lawyer will contact you about divorce proceedings. Please, don't try to contact me directly. David?" I stood in our kitchen for a final moment, looking at the space where we'd had morning coffee routines, argued about grocery lists, planned weekend trips. The house felt like a museum of someone else's life, beautiful and meaningful, and completely foreign to who I was now. I drove to the hotel with windows down, Coltrane playing softly, and realized I felt more like myself than I had in months. The weight of pretending our marriage was working, of ignoring signs of deterioration, of trying to be supportive while my wife systematically devalued everything we'd built, all of that was gone. For the first time since Sarah moved down the street, I felt free. The thing about consequences is they're often delayed, giving people just enough time to convince themselves they've escaped entirely. Claire spent the first week after I moved out telling herself this was temporary, that I needed time to cool down, that we'd eventually work through this like mature adults. She called my hotel room twice, left 3 voicemails, and sent flowers to my office. I didn't respond to any of it. My lawyer, Janet Morrison, was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and calm competence from handling hundreds of divorces. She'd seen every variation of marital breakdown and had no patience for drama. Unreconcilable differences, she said, reviewing my case notes. No children, assets split 50-50, no alimony. We can have papers filed by Friday. That fast? I asked. Your wife asked for an open marriage, Janet replied dryly. In my experience, that makes everything irreconcilable pretty quickly. The legal process was straightforward. Because I'd been methodical about separating finances and Claire hadn't contested anything, we could file for uncontested divorce. The whole thing would be finalized in 60 days. But while legal machinery ground forward, emotional reckoning was just beginning for Claire. I learned about it through mutual friends. People who'd known us as a unit and were now trying to understand how we'd become 2 separate individuals. My friend Marcus called me the second week. He and his wife Jenny had been couple friends, the kind we'd had over for dinner parties and weekend barbecues. Jesus, David, Marcus said. Jenny just talked to Claire. She's completely falling apart. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, and meant it. I didn't take pleasure in Claire's distress, but I also didn't feel responsible for it. She says you won't return her calls, that you're refusing to talk. There's nothing to talk about, I said. We're getting divorced. The lawyers are handling details. Marcus was quiet. Look, man, I don't know what happened, but don't you think you should at least try to work it out? You guys were together for 5 years. I'd been expecting this conversation. Marcus and Jenny had a solid marriage, and they couldn't imagine circumstances where problems couldn't be solved through communication and compromise. Marcus, I said carefully, if Jenny came to you tomorrow and said she wanted to open up your marriage, that she needed to explore relationships with other men, what would you do? The silence lasted almost 30 seconds. She would never say that, Marcus said finally. Neither would the woman I married, I replied. But Claire did say it, and that's why we're getting divorced. Through Marcus and Jenny, and through other friends, I learned about Claire's growing desperation. She'd returned to work after a week of calling in sick, but she was distracted and emotional. She'd been crying in office bathrooms, snapping at colleagues, missing deadlines. More importantly, her friendship with Sarah was deteriorating rapidly. Without the stability of my presence as safety net, Claire was discovering that Sarah's advice about liberation was easier to give than live by. Sarah had encouraged Claire to blow up her marriage, but had no wisdom about handling the aftermath. Jenny told me Claire had shown up at their house one evening, crying and asking if they thought I might change my mind. She'd apparently oscillated between anger, claiming I was being unreasonable, and desperation, begging them to intercede. She keeps saying she never meant for this to happen, Jenny reported. That she was just trying to grow as a person, and you took it the wrong way. I wasn't surprised by this narrative. Claire was reframing her actions as misunderstanding rather than betrayal, positioning herself as victim of my inflexibility rather than architect of our marriage's destruction. But the fiction was becoming harder to maintain as weeks passed. I was moving forward with my life. I'd found a good apartment, was settling into new routine, was even considering dating. Meanwhile, Claire was discovering that the independence she'd thought she wanted felt a lot like loneliness. The breaking point came 6 weeks after I'd moved out. Claire showed up at my new apartment on a Saturday morning, looking like she'd been crying for hours. She must have gotten my address from divorce papers. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, wearing one of my old college sweatshirts and holding a coffee cup from our old routine. "I brought you coffee," she said, voice small and uncertain. I looked at this woman, who'd been my wife, who'd shared my bed and dreams for 5 years. She looked fragile in a way that might have moved me 2 months ago. Now, I felt nothing but mild sadness for the person she'd chosen to become. "Claire, you can't be here," I said gently. "My lawyer told you not to contact me directly." "I know," she said, tears starting. "But I needed to see you. I needed to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I replied. "You asked for an open marriage. I said no. We're getting divorced. That's the whole story." It's not," she said desperately. "It's so much more complicated. I was confused. I was listening to Sarah. I made a mistake. But I never stopped loving you. I never wanted anyone else." I leaned against my doorframe, looking at her with detachment. "Claire, if you never wanted anyone else, why did you ask for permission to be with other people?" "Because I thought it would make us stronger," she said. "I thought it would help us grow." "No," I said quietly. "You asked because you were already thinking about someone else. You were already emotionally involved. You just wanted my permission to make it physical." Claire's face crumpled. "That's not true." "It doesn't matter if it's true," I said. "The fact that you asked means you were already gone. You just wanted me to give you permission to leave." She stood there in my hallway, holding the coffee, crying like someone who'd just realized they'd made an irreversible mistake. And maybe she had. But her regret wasn't about hurting me. It was about consequences to herself. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't be alone. I can't handle the divorce and the house and everything by myself." "You should have thought of that before you decided our marriage wasn't enough for you," I said, and gently closed the door. I watched through the peephole as Claire stood there for another 5 minutes, maybe hoping I'd change my mind, maybe just trying to process what had happened. Finally, she set the coffee cup down outside my door and walked away. I never drank the coffee. I let it sit there until the building's cleaning service disposed of it, a final offering from someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of what she'd lost. But understanding and regret aren't the same as genuine remorse. Claire's pain was real, but it was pain of consequences, not pain of recognition. She was sorry she'd lost me, sorry she'd lost our life together, sorry she'd listened to Sarah's advice. But she still didn't seem to understand that asking for an open marriage had been a betrayal of everything we'd built together. That distinction between regret and remorse was why my door stayed closed, and why, for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace with my decision. 10 months later, I'm sitting in my apartment on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, working on the crossword that Claire and I used to do together. I solve it in 37 minutes, a personal record, and realize I haven't thought about her in nearly a week. The transformation has been gradual but profound. I wake at 7:15 now, drink my coffee black, make decisions based solely on my own desires. I bought a leather chair Claire would have hated. Too masculine, too impractical. I listen to jazz at volumes that would have bothered her. I eat cereal for dinner without apologizing to anyone. The divorce was finalized 4 months ago. Claire kept the house, but had to refinance and take on a roommate. The roommate isn't Sarah. Their friendship imploded 3 months after I moved out. Sarah moved to Portland in August, claiming a fresh start. According to Jenny, Claire had finally confronted Sarah about her role in destroying our marriage. The confrontation was ugly, with Claire accusing Sarah of giving advice she'd never had to live with the consequences of. Sarah responded that Claire had made her own choices and needed to take responsibility. Without Sarah's validation and without our marriage as a safety net, Claire discovered that independence was less liberating than advertised. She'd wanted to explore other relationships, but the men she met were either looking for casual hookups or were put off by someone rebounding from marriage. I know this through mutual friends who seem to think I need updates. They mention almost casually that Claire seems lonely, that she's asked about me. "She's really changed," Jenny told me over lunch. She's not the same person who made that request. She's learned from this. I nodded politely and changed the subject. Jenny meant well, but Claire's growth, if genuine, was no longer my concern. You can't unask certain questions, can't unknow certain truths about someone's character. The most interesting development has been my own social life. People seem drawn to how I handled the situation. With dignity, without drama, without trying to turn anyone against Claire. I've been invited to parties, introduced to single friends, included in activities I'd never been part of as a married man. There's Rebecca, who works at the bookstore near my apartment. We've been having coffee together for the past month. Yesterday, she kissed me goodbye after we'd spent the afternoon walking through botanical gardens. It was a soft kiss, suggesting possibility rather than urgency. I haven't told Rebecca much about my marriage, just that it ended and I'm ready to move forward. She hasn't pressed for details. She's in her early 30s, never married, and seems genuinely content with her life, rather than desperate to change it. I've also started therapy. Not because I'm struggling, but because I wanted to understand why I'd stayed in a marriage that was slowly diminishing me. Dr. Williams helped me see that my tolerance for Claire's growing dissatisfaction had been self-abandonment. You gave up parts of yourself to accommodate her unhappiness, she observed. But accommodation isn't love, it's just enabling. The strangest thing is how rarely I think about Claire now. For the first few months, she was constantly on my mind, not with longing, but with obsessive analysis. But gradually, she's faded from daily consciousness. The final closure came 2 weeks ago at the grocery store. Claire looked up from her cart to find me standing 3 feet away. "David?" she said, voice small and uncertain. "Hi, Claire," I replied, realizing I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering connection. "Oh, how are you?" she asked. "I'm doing well. You?" "I'm managing. The house is good. Work is good. I've been thinking about going back to school." We stood there, 2 people who used to share everything and now had nothing to say. "I think about us sometimes," she said finally. "About what happened." "I hope you're happy," I said, and meant it. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "David, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it." Her apology was genuine, I could see that. But it was also irrelevant. Some actions can't be undone with apologies. "I know you are," I said gently. "Take care of yourself, Claire." I walked away then, finished my shopping, and drove home. I didn't think about the encounter again until now. And even now, it feels like something that happened to someone else. Claire's request wasn't just about sex or exploration. It was about fundamentally changing the terms of our relationship without my consent. My response, to simply opt out entirely, was the only way to maintain my self-respect and integrity. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't anger or confrontation. It's complete withdrawal of your participation in someone else's disrespect. My silence was more devastating than any argument, my absence more powerful than any ultimatum. Claire got exactly what she asked for. She wanted to explore other relationships, to discover parts of herself she couldn't access while married to me. She's free to do all of that now without the burden of my expectations. She just has to do it alone. As for me, I've discovered something more valuable than the marriage I lost: complete self-respect, and the knowledge that I can trust my own judgment, even when it leads me away from everything I thought I wanted. I finished my coffee and set down the completed crossword. Outside, the city is waking up. In a few hours, I'll meet Rebecca for lunch. But for now, I'm content to sit in my leather chair, listening to Miles Davis at exactly the volume I prefer. I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. I'm free, and I'm exactly where I choose to be. The sound of silence, it turns out, is the sound of a man who finally knows his own worth. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.